Hello, Selling Jesus listeners. Scott Holman here. You know, I recently read a LinkedIn post, and it was a question posted by one of the other LinkedIn members, and the question was this: if you could go back in time and change one item, what would it be? Or you could say, what was your greatest regret? There were hundreds of comments, and as I looked at the comments, I was able to break this list down to 5 items that seemed to compile over everyone's comments, and one of those 5 was I would make better relationship decisions. Well, today's guest, Alyssa Hunt, carried her share of relationship baggage. However, in her search for a fulfilling relationship, she found that fulfillment in Jesus Christ. And what's awesome about God is the moment she found her fulfillment in Him, He brought her the man of her dreams. Now, before we dive into that story, like always, I do have a couple requests. If you would do 2 things for me. One, if you're a Facebook member, it would be great if you would like and follow the Selling Jesus Facebook page. You can find that page at facebook.com/I Sell Jesus. In addition, I always ask in the early stages of this podcast if you would please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and leave a review and a little feedback. It not only helps me know your thoughts as a listener, but it helps this podcast reach the greatest audience through iTunes. Well, again, I thank you, and now let's dive into this story. Alyssa, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank you for sharing your story with us in advance. I'm excited to hear how God has changed your life. But before I do that, could you tell me a little more about yourself?
Sure. Let's see. I'm a 70s gal. Well, I technically 80s, but I grew up in a nice, respectable family where, for the time, we were the only black family on the street. But I had a lot of experiences in life enough to know that where I am now is a good place. I'm a happy homeschool mom. I'm a housewife and I'm an author. I'm an Anglophile, uh, a serious tea drinker, and I am just one of those children of God who made it through a lot of difficulty. And I can smile and sit back and actually be proud of sharing some of those trials on something like a show today.
I'm excited to hear it all. I know those listening are excited as well. Before we dive too far into your story, you mentioned that you're an author. Can you tell me a little bit about some of your writings?
Sure. What I write right now, I'm an independent author. I tried traditional publishing for a while, and I didn't like the lack of feedback that I was able to give in the process. So I took that work back. But I write. I'm a horror fanatic. I love to be scared for some reason, and so what I do is I take a few children's short stories and I add a safe um, environment where it can be a little spooky, but it's always a happy ending for them. Not because I want to give them some kind of false pretense on happy endings, but because I want it to be safe for my son to read and enjoy until he feels comfortable. I also write young adult and new adult horror, which is more of a scarier thing but it always has this theme um, where you get to turn back to God in some way, shape, or form. It's not something where they come through to an ending on their own, and those endings are not always happy. There's always something that could possibly be waiting in the end for those.
I got to tell you, I'm a happy ending person. So, yeah, I like the kids' version of it.
Well, then you'll like the other story that I just finished.
I'm curious, and I don't even know these answers before I ask. Do you have a blog or a place where someone can go learn a little more about you if they are interested?
I do. It's on my website, www.areneehunt.com. It's very simple. I share book reviews. I share Christian as well as just regular fiction and nonfiction stories, as well as a few things about myself and what I like and what I enjoy doing.
Because not all of us are great spellers, go ahead and spell out that web address for us so that we can
Sure.
find it if we are interested.
Absolutely. It's exactly as I said. Renee, Renee Hunt, HUNT.com.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And listeners, if you are interested, feel free to check it out. And one thing we just heard, Alyssa likes feedback. And make sure that you
Absolutely.
provide your feedback and show encouragement as well.
Thank you.
All right, Alyssa, because I like to get right into these stories, I appreciate you sharing your story of your journey to faith. And to me, every journey begins with the start, the beginning, our upbringing.
Mhm.
So, to just dive right in, can you give us a little insight of what life was like as a child and how you were raised, specifically what Christ or how Christ was a part of your upbringing?
Absolutely. I'm a military brat. I was born in Orange, California, and we did a lot of traveling, but somehow my mom always found a church for us to attend. When we came back here to St. Louis from, I believe it was Memphis, no, it was Cherry Point, North Carolina. We moved here and I dived right into my mom's family church. My grandmother helped to start a church, the name Mount Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, that's in the city of St. Louis. And we would travel from Ferguson to the St. Louis city every Sunday, every Thursday, and in between with any other programs. I grew up a part of choir. And my mom grew up in the choir, and my family, the bulk of my mom's side of the family, is still attending that church today. Um, Faith was a serious thing for my household, even though my father was a believer but did not attend church. He was the one who went during the occasional, like Mother's Day programs or Christmas and things along that line. But my brother and I, we went every Sunday to Sunday school, Bible study, VBS. We did all of that. And I believe that even though we grew up with such a strong sense of Christ with our own Bibles and reading together, because my dad wasn't completely unified with it, we didn't sit and have Bible studies together like we do with my family. That was one thing I felt I needed to have in my household. But it was still a safe environment. Now, my brother and I, we got in trouble all the time. We were just bad kids, curious and always messing with something we weren't supposed to. But it was a very loving family. My dad was strict and militant, but he wasn't mean. He was the one who taught me how to do cartwheels and bike rides and stuff like that, just like any other parent. But it was definitely a structured environment, and I'm so grateful that even with the way my dad was, um, that we had Christ involved in everything, that we still prayed, we still enjoyed the holidays without thinking that the Easter bunny was the most important part of Easter and things along that line. It to me, it was pivotal for my upbringing.
Now, let me ask, those who are raised in church tend to have two outcomes. One being they continue serving Christ on throughout their entire adulthood, and there's another set who tend to be raised hearing the stories. They hear the lessons of the Bible, yet for some reason they just don't buy into it 100%, or something knocks them off course.
Hmm.
What was your outcome as you started entering your youth life and your adult life?
It was, I kind of rode the fence because growing up, traveling all the time, I was always the new kid. So I was always meeting different groups of kids, different personalities and environmental backgrounds that I was kind of a chameleon. I conformed with still having a lot of my own ideas, but because I was trying so hard to fit in, there were times where I became a follower and wasn't quite where I was supposed to be. I think that one of my pivotal points came from both my brother and I because whereas he ended up getting in trouble with the law for a short while, I was the one who um, felt that I was meant to be first off a nurse, which is what was my dream for the longest time, but to be someone's wife and a mom. And so I didn't have daddy issues or anything, but I wanted to be married. I knew from about 15 years old that I wanted to have a high school romance and marry the person out of high school, become the nurse, and move forward into my life as a mother of X amount of kids. I think that what turned me around was just meeting the wrong guy. And I made my steps in the wrong, I didn't take the proper process. I thought, oh, okay, I'm getting married. He proposed. My parents did not like him at all, but, but, I'm getting married. I don't have to wait anymore. And that's where my life kind of went crazy because I ended up giving myself to this person. And I think 2 or 3 days afterwards, I found out that he'd been with someone else as well. So I ended up breaking up with this guy, and that's when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. So it was a crazy time for me because I think then I felt like I was such a failure, and there was this fear of now I'm getting a part of my dream, and the other parts that I needed with this dream are no longer available to me. And so it was a very stressful time, needless to say, for both my parents, who were wonderful the entire time. They supported me 100%. And even though it's not what my parents believe, they made the option of, if you don't want to have this child, we will take care of you for that too.
How old were you when
And
you became pregnant?
when I was pregnant, I was 17 and a half. I was about to graduate from high school. Um, Already looking, I didn't want to go away to college. I wanted to stay at a community college they have in Jacksonville. So I wanted to stay where I was. But it was still an option, even though I was about to become an independent adult, so to speak. It was still one of the worst feelings in my life to think I have no one. I'm all alone. And the person who I trusted most, who told me that they wanted to have children, didn't care at all. But I knew that I couldn't take the easy way out, so to speak. There was no way that I was not going to have that child. And I knew that I couldn't carry a child and then give them away, even though that is a beautiful thing. I knew I can't, I mean, this may never happen again. So I knew I couldn't let her go. Well, at the time I didn't know who she was, but
Uh huh.
um, I knew that I did not want to give her away. I was going to go ahead. It was my option. I did this. I'm going to take care of it. But from there on, I ran into a lot of stumbling blocks. I had 100% love and a great deal of support from my parents. I had moved out. I had my own little place with her for a while. But when I was struggling, they allowed me to come back home. So that's one thing that stuck with me more than anything, that I never, because I did not pull some of these stunts that a lot of people that I've been seeing, they're so angry at the world for their mistakes that they kind of burned their bridge. I'd never had that happen for me. My parents were always there. So I was able to go back home, get back on my feet. And then I later on got married uh, to a guy who I thought was wonderful. And I ended up married 1 year and a day to that person. He was, he had issues, mental issues that the family did not divulge to me. And as far as I knew, he only had seizures, but it turns out that there was a lot more going on with him. So I ended up leaving Florida after fighting to stay there so long and coming here to St. Louis because he was just unbelievable. I was actually in a physically abusive relationship. The good, well, it's not really good because it's never good to fight. I don't condone violence, but as I matured as a mother, but not fully where I guess I should have been, while even attending church, while living there and with my husband, I became very angry. And I think I became angry more at myself than I did at anything around me. My daughter, she did not, she was not a part of the violence or anything, and she was so young, she doesn't remember any of it. But I had to receive a year's worth of constantly wondering what's going to happen next before I finally decided enough was enough. I'm not going to fight for this marriage anymore because fighting when you hear someone say that they're fighting for their marriage, you you don't think that you're actually fist fighting. You know, you don't think that you think it's an emotional and spiritual battle, and you're gonna stay in the Bible and you're gonna keep doing this or that. But my spouse at the time, he was pretending he was going to church, but he really wasn't paying attention. He wasn't sharing with me. We weren't talking like we had in the beginning of our marriage. And so I decided enough was enough, and I left and came to St. Louis where my grandparents were, well, the bulk of my family. And I stayed here for a while. And I was so ashamed that here I am, a single mom, now divorced, from not even a strong, a year, I mean, a year and a day of marriage. It was kind of a joke, but well, to myself, it was a personal joke, but I was really angry with myself. But I kept thinking, you know what? There's lots of people who have remarried. I can do this. I can do this. So I came back to St. Louis. I got a job, and I was staying, renting out a little place that was with my grandparents. And I stayed there for about, I want to say about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And I found a lot of my friends from old and met some new ones. And I really felt that, okay, I'm getting to a place where I'm refocusing everything, looking at how I want my life. I started attending my childhood church again, where all my family was still there waiting for me. I had a wonderful support system. And I think at the time my parents were stationed in Kuwait. So I didn't have easy access to them, but I met a guy who became my best friend, and, I loved my daughter unconditionally, and got to a place where after about 3 years of being friends, we got engaged, and then we got married about a year after that. And he was wonderful, perfect gentleman, best friend, had a blast. But again, something came up for me that kind of became a stumbling block. And that was, I got a phone call from a family member who I hadn't spoken to since I was itty bitty. And when I heard his voice, I just, I became terrified and I didn't understand why. And I hung up on him, and my husband was talking to me, trying to figure out what was going on. And the realization that I had been molested just kind of come up. I didn't remember it. It was one of those mental blocks that, um, it was just so much that you just shut it out. And that's exactly what I had done. I had forgotten everything about him until that phone call. And he called me back, and my husband told him that we weren't going to talk and did not call back. And I called my mom, and I asked, I said, hey, do you know that blah, blah, blah called me? And she said, oh yeah, I gave him, phone number. He called me up. And I don't know why. I just said, Mom, he molested me. And so I broke my mom's heart. And of course, I broke my aunt's heart because my mom had to talk to my aunt. So it was
Hmm.
so much that came up for me. I think my daughter was around 6. I think she was in kindergarten around the time. And it really devastated me. And I think my husband didn't know how to handle it. And before I knew it, he and I stopped talking. And so I began to feel alone and isolated. And I would just do things with my daughter, or he would do things with our daughter because he had adopted her. And I realized that my marriage was going down the hill. I didn't, and so again, inadequacies play a part in that. I'm constantly telling myself, you're no good. You're just used up, and here's your second botched marriage. You have a great daughter, but things just aren't going right. And all of the church attendance and everything just didn't seem to help me. I was afraid to tell my pastor because as much as I loved that church, um, there was a change of pastors, and they were having trouble, and things were happening in the church that are like a reality TV show. I will never go into that. But so I ended up kind of stepping away from church for a while, and I went back to California, and that was on a whim. I literally took my daughter out of school, packed up my truck, and we just took off, she and I. And I left my husband a letter and I let him know that I'll take care of everything, but I was gone. I just left. And I know it was horribly wrong the way I did things, but I realized that my best defense mechanism was to just shut the door and go on. When I'd left my first husband, I told him I was done. I picked up all my items and I left. And I did it again a second time. So I realized, okay, I'm never going to get married again. I got a kid who's really grown up. It's a hard to have a relationship with someone when you have an older child in the process. So I just figured I was done. I'm never going to be happily married. The dream that I was looking for is botched and I did it. And I'm just going to have to deal with all these things, you know? So I took it all on myself. I didn't stop and ask God for help. I didn't go to the church that I'd grown up in for help. I never told my parents, and I think that I kind of got settled in my unhappy situation. I just figured this is just how life is going to be, and so I became very angry. I was literally in fist fights. I got into fights because if someone said something I didn't like, we would fight.
I
So
can't
I
even
was,
imagine that, but wow.
I know my mom didn't either. And thank God I never got into a situation where I was arrested or anything horrible would happen. But I was a very, very angry person. And this is in my early 20s, mid 20s. And what brought me down was my parents. They had come back to California, and my dad was diagnosed with, he was misdiagnosed. They said that he was jaundiced and something else, and it turned out to be pancreatic cancer. So, because my dad did not want my mom away from the family should he pass away, which of course we knew he would. Pancreatic is not a very nice, one of the nicer cancers, I guess you could say. So we packed up everything and we came back to St. Louis, and I stayed home with my dad until he passed away. And the one thing that haunted me was the fact that the day that he passed away, he was laying in his bed in his room, and his brother, one of his brothers, had come to see him. And I told my dad, at this time, when we came back to St. Louis, he was still going to work every day. He was one of those guys that, unless something tragic, I mean, super serious, not even a diagnosis of cancer was going to stop him from going to work. And so he got up every morning and he went to work for about 3 weeks. And then he started going to work part time. And within about 2 months time frame from going to work full time to being completely bedridden. This was like in 2 months time. He couldn't get up without help. And my dad was a Marine. He was 100%. He did like, I think 2 or 3 tours in Vietnam. He wasn't even here for any of our births because he was going through all of that stuff. But, he was a strong man, and I always saw him as strong. And for him to come down so hard, it broke my heart. And when the day that he passed away, I happened to walk past the room we were seeing my uncle off, and I heard this sound. And I went to him and I held his hand and I said, "Are you okay?" And he just gave me a slight nod. I said, we're going to see your brother off, and I'll be back in a few minutes." And just that fast, he was gone.
Wow.
And when we went back into the house, my mom, I went to my room. My mom went to him, and she called me in, and she said, "Check your dad." And so I went over to him. I held his hand, and I put my ear to his chest because he was so frail. It was hard to kind of really feel his pulse and stuff. And he was gone. So, um, my mom just started breaking down. I called my uncle back. He had literally hadn't even left the neighborhood. And he came back, and then I called all my grandmother, his mom, and his other siblings. And while my mom, who'd been with my dad since I think 11th grade, um, broke down, I had to take my daughter and tell her what had happened. I let my ex know what had happened, and everyone's there for him. And I felt like I couldn't even cry during that time. I didn't mourn. Um, my mom needed me. My brother was still in California at the time with his wife and son. Well, he wasn't, didn't have a child then, but I had to be there for everybody. So I was helping with all the arrangements and trying to make sure that my mom was okay. And it wasn't until his funeral that I realized just how hurt I was. And I felt guilty because um, when he made that sound that brought me to his room, I felt like I should have stayed there. And so we didn't get to say goodbye. I felt like that was an indication for me, and I didn't pay attention to it. Another thing I botched up, you know. So after the funeral, I finally broke down, and I was just mad. I was angry, and I needed an outlet. So I went back to the church that I'd grown up in, and I decided, okay, I'm doing things the right way. I'm not going to get married anymore. I'm going to be married to the church. So I dove in 100%. I became active in some of any and everything I could get my hands on without being too overwhelmed and not having attention to my daughter. And I got a job working at the Federal Records Building that's over on Page. And so every day I went there with a smile plastered on my face, still feeling angry at everything, but I'm dealing. And this guy just kind of pops up out of the way and he introduces himself. And I say hi and go on about my business, ignore him. And I found out that the best way to get rid of this guy, because he kept showing up every day, was to put on headphones, even if I wasn't listening to music. And somehow, in about a week and a half's time, this guy annoyed me so much that I finally talked to him. And I said, well, who are you? What is your name? And he said, Scott. And I'm like, okay. So what do you want? I was not very nice. And it ended up being the guy who I've been married to now for 15 years. But he was just so annoying that he kind of pushed through my little angry barrier. So I figured I maybe I should just say hi to this guy, But I think that what truly took me from growing up in the church to being angry and having all these things happen and remembering things and dealing with my problems and issues that I felt that I had. I felt that I needed to just go 100% into the church. So after I'd gone back to meeting my husband and moving over into the Lutheran faith after so long, I decided, Catholics are really devout. There's a lot of I mean, of course, I knew a lot of them didn't attend church anymore, but I was like, I think they have like a closer line to God. Maybe I'm in the wrong, you know, division of faith. Maybe I need to branch over into a different faith. I remember thinking that. And my great grandfather, who was Irish Catholic, had a church that he attended, and I thought maybe that's what I need to do. But they had to do a lot of work and they had a lot of memorization, and I felt that it became rote. So I knew that that's not what I wanted to do. But when I married my husband, my current husband now, uh, he was Lutheran. He was like a baby Lutheran, adult finding his faith. And I felt, okay, this is what's really going to do it. So I felt that I went from growing in where it came from within me with the spirit to thinking I needed to do these things to become the proper Christian that I had gotten lost somewhere. And so when I became Lutheran, as much as I loved that being at that church and what it was about and what I learned, I felt that I had to do these things. The programs, the services were almost, we could mimic them verbatim. We knew what was coming unless there was a special holiday. They did things that were different, but I felt I became stagnant. And I think it's because of the constant repetitiveness. The songs, especially growing up Baptist, when you go to a song where you don't even clap while you're praising, I felt stiff as a board. It was very difficult to enjoy my praise because a lot of the songs felt almost like they were written on the same rhythm. And I just grew so stagnant that I felt, okay, I'm doing things for my church community. I'm doing things in my neighborhood, but my faith is getting lost again.
So,
And
Alyssa, can
mhm,
I ask a question here as am just listening to you and hearing you?
mhm,
It sounds to me that you church, and I'm putting church now in the famous quotes.
mhm,
Church was a very important part of your life, and as you have shared, there were lots of not as fine moments. Let's put them that way for you. Some relationship issues that you had to deal with, and probably even up to this point that you've brought me to, are still dealing with. This part in the story, of course.
mhm.
And it sounds to me that you're trying to fix it with church, but not Jesus.
Exactly. That's exactly what was happening with me. I kept thinking that even though I know that I had to have a more personal relationship with Jesus and let Him bring those things out of me, I felt I had to do something to have it come from me. And not come from me with Jesus as my guide, but from me. I was so caught up in trying to do things myself. And so I kept thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a part of this program. I'm going to be part of this outreach. I'm going to do this because it was all church related. And
In
so
essence, you were trying to earn your place or earn your love.
exactly,
Yeah, a
exactly.
common mistake a lot of us make, but a lot of us are taught that way, feeling like
Mhm.
the only way we can please the Father of Heaven is to
Mhm.
do enough to please Him. And some are probably taught that. Some, I think it's just human nature. We feel like love is an earned thing rather than
Mhm.
just being there.
There's a phrase. It's beautiful, but I think it was taken out of context for me. I'm about my father's business.
Right, right.
You know, and that's what I thought I was supposed. That's what I truly felt I had to do because I had so much wrong that I had done or endured that the only way to fix it was to be about his business. I need to do that.
Okay,
I need
so
to. Mhm.
let's go back a little bit. And I don't need to dive into the dirt too much, but I
Mhm.
want you have a story here that I know more than one person has experienced, and that is broken relationship. In fact, the other
Mhm.
day I saw a LinkedIn post, and it said, if you could go back in time and change anything, what would it be? And at the time of me seeing the post, it had about 120 comments. And the post itself intrigued me, so I started diving into the comments because what I wanted to see are what the common denominators might be.
Mhm.
And I was able to break that list down to 5 things of the most common regrets. Two of them come to
Mhm.
mind at this exact moment. One was, I wish I would have made a decision to follow Christ much earlier. The second one was, I wish I would have made better relationship decisions.
Mhm.
And based on that, I know there are many listeners who have struggled in the world of relationships, not understanding what a good relationship is in the first place, getting themselves into relationships that maybe were not perfect. But one of the things you said that jumped out to me is in all of this, you began to feel worthless.
Mhm.
Where
Absolutely.
was this just not understanding what a real relationship was? Was this just somehow you never built worth over life? Do you think the molestation had a part of that as well? I guess I'm asking you to speak to others. What do you think may have been the root cause to this?
I believe that I allowed, and this is after reading a lot of books and I went to counseling. I believe my greatest mistake in understanding relationships was that I allowed my wants to overshadow my spiritual needs. I grew up in a 100% beautiful family where my parents never argued in front of us. They spoke to each other. They prayed, even though my dad wasn't one who prayed aloud. They did things together. I knew what a sound relationship was. And I saw my mom's walk with Jesus. I think what it is that I knew that there were these things from TV, from the best of the 80s love songs, things along that line. I saw myself wanting the relationship of my parents, but the outside world was showing me something that was so much bigger. I can still have what I want, but it's not going to be spiritual. It was so much more worldly that I started taking on the wants more than what I needed, which was to stay in my Bible, to develop that relationship instead of taking on the wants of the world. I began to, at the time, especially in my teens, when I had not realized that I was, instead of waiting and holding on to those values, that I wanted to be like everyone else. And I saw these relationships at school and on TV or what have you. And I just stopped wanting what I should have been focusing on more so than anything else. And that was to just, I guess, just wing it, because that's honestly what I ended up doing. If you just enjoy life and take it as it comes, it's so much easier than trying to go along these guidelines that are going to keep me where I need to be. There's a path that I should have and should have followed, and I was on that path, but it veered off here and there. And instead of coming back and around, I just allowed it to grow like a tree branch. And I kept spreading myself out in all these different areas until I just found that there was nothing left for me.
It's a common saying that people will allow their feelings to begin directing their life. It sounds that that's kind of what happened for you. Is you knew the roadmap, you
Hmm.
knew what directions you should take to get to where you wanted to be, but you began allowing feelings and pressures from others to guide you off course. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially when it came to my engagement. When I was engaged to my daughter's father, um, he kept saying, "Oh, come on," all the things to convince the girl, so to speak, And I kept saying, "No, no, we're gonna wait. You're just gonna have to wait. You're just gonna have to wait." But I caved. I didn't stick to what I knew was what God said. I mean, He says it over and over again. That's a gift that's for marriage, and as strong as I wanted to be about it, I just said, I'll rationalize it. I'm gonna be married anyway. It's just one of those things where, and it happens so much, and even with it happening to me and with my daughter, I explained to her so many times, the world's going to try to get you to do one thing and you have to do the other. Look at my mistakes. And I was honest with her when she got to be certain ages. I gave the PG version of everything until she was able to understand. And the older she got, the more I was honest with her about things. And it still didn't stop her. She was even younger than I was when she was pregnant her first time.
Right.
And I felt again, okay, but at this time I had matured enough to know, okay, God, it's not what I did. I understand that. It's not something that I influenced and caused her to do. This was a choice that she made. The same way I made choices. I don't feel like this is on me anymore. And I was to me, that was a blessed moment in itself because I had focused more so on Jesus than on me. And He helped me through all of those times, to the point where, when she was going through a lot of things much greater and more difficult than anything I'd endured at that age, um, He was there because I'd stopped trying to fix it myself. Every time something came up, I was like, okay, Lord, my hands are up. As they say, take the wheel. You're in control. I'm not going to fix anything without you by my side. I can't fix anything without you. I'm not going to try it anymore. And honestly, it was her pregnancy because she was so much younger and 100% never ready. She had no life skills. By the time I had her, I had already had jobs. I'd had my own bank accounts. I'd lived on my own for a little while. And there were so many things that I had done, and she didn't get to experience any of those things. She quit school and then got her GED because I guess they didn't have somewhere for her to go, so she had to finish up at home. So I had to walk with her through these things, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, I I can't do anything but be an ear. I gotta listen, but not just to her. I gotta listen to what my book is telling me, because God, I can't handle this on my own. When she found out she was pregnant, um, I didn't have to feel like the world was falling on my shoulders. And it's not, I wish I had this amazing story to say how that came about, but I don't. Just like everything else in my life, it just happened.
All right, so
Um,
I need to jump back there, and I want to clarify this because that was
mm,
the question I was getting ready to ask you. We've jumped a little bit from where you were trying to have church fix you,
yeah.
and then you're telling me about your daughter and the situation here, and at this point it sounds like you've matured and now Christ has become a focus of your life. Can you at least give me a dotted line of how that happened? Where did you finally realize that Christ is the solution? Jesus is your answer, not church, not doing things, not fixing yourself, but Jesus is the answer. The Bible is the ultimate guidebook. Where did
hmm
that connection finally happen?
I'm going to have to say it's the day that she called me to tell me she was pregnant. That's the only thing I can think because I had gone through, I was kind of emotional. I just had my son not too long ago, and she'd called me up, and I had already gone through this. Okay, it was right around the time that when I was pregnant with my son. That's when it became clear for me. And the reasoning behind that is because my son is an IVF baby. We had some issues, some health issues with myself, and I found out that I had to go through surgery and all these other things. So I had gotten pregnant with triplets, and I lost two early on. And so that's when I started reading my Bible again. And I believe that shortly after going through early delivery and all these crazy things, I believe that's where it was because the entire time during that, I was back in my Bible, but I didn't really know it until she called me up and told me she was pregnant. Because when she told me, I didn't get mad at her. I didn't. Uh, I didn't have this big shock of, oh my goodness, what have you done? I didn't go through any of those emotions. When she told me, um, I was kind of quiet, and the first thing that came across my mind was, it's okay. I really felt that that was one of those visual moments where Jesus just came and kind of hugged me and he said, you know what? It's okay. We can handle this.
This is really cool because now you're answering my questions before I even get to them. You mentioned you mentioned early how anger became really a part of your life. You were angry about circumstances from your childhood. You were angry about relationships. Probably angry at the individuals, angry at yourself. I'm going to even guess you were probably a little angry at God because we as humans tend to be blamers. We don't want to
Right.
take responsibility for our own actions. We can always rationalize what we're doing and point our finger at others. It's just naturally who we are. And so,
Mhm.
with all
Mhm.
this anger that's built up, and again, I'm sure I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit, but I'm sure there was an amount of anger toward God and all He had let happen for you.
I
Was it in
think
this
that
moment that it released?
I think it really was because in saying that I was angry at him, I think it's because I felt like I was doing all of this for you. And this is what this is what's coming back at me. And I didn't want to feel like I was going to be this martyr, so to speak. I'm doing all this for you, and when I fall down, it's going to be for you. It was more so, I all of these things are happening, and you're not going to help me out. But I really feel that when I felt that release, that comfort that day when she was talking to me in the kitchen, I think that was the help that I've been waiting for all along. For me, it said that you're not alone, and I'm going to do this with you. I felt all the times that it was just always me doing everything. I had to take care of my mom. I had to hide what had happened to me. Well, I hid that so well I didn't even remember it, till my 20s. Um, that darn first husband, I was still going to church then, and this is what I got for it. It was so much that I honestly, it did. It just kind of just vanished. I don't know. I can't say it's anything but the spirit, because I could have been like any other parent and been upset and furious and say, "Oh, you're ruining your life," just like I did. But I didn't feel like my life was ruined. I just thought that it was kind of a waste. And to me, that there's a difference in ruin and waste.
No,
I don't know
absolutely.
why,
You know,
but mhm.
Alyssa, we're I'm just looking at the clock, and I know we have to,
Oh yes, yes.
tie this up at some point. And your story is an amazing story. I don't want you to even take it at that point. I'm enjoying every moment of this. Um,
I understand.
with that though, I want to make a jump, a fairly large jump.
Okay.
I now know the spot, the moment where Jesus, I'm going to say Jesus became real to you. The moment
Mhm.
you felt the Spirit just made a connection for you and started a new journey for you, a journey that was following Christ and being okay with the past, not necessarily um, making it an excuse. You accepted it. You just said it wasn't it was just waste in the past, and so now
Mhm.
you're moving forward. I personally know you. I know you to be one of the most chipper, joyful people in my circle.
Thank you.
Who are you today? What has Christ done for you? Can you give us a summary of? We know the past now, but who
Mhm.
are you today? Who is Alyssa?
Honestly, Alyssa, I am a spiritual board. I honestly feel that when I get up in the mornings and I grab my Bible and my cup of coffee, I am waiting for his message on my heart. I don't try to get up with this. I mean, of course, I'm a homeschool mom, so I have to have some kind of plan. But I get up in the mornings and I wait for his word on me. I'm not trying to handle it all on my own anymore. I feel good about if I'm driving and my car breaks down, I don't say, "Oh gosh, I got to wait for AAA." I just pull out my jack and I handle it myself and I'm like, "Lord, I remember what I'm supposed to do. Can you help me make sure I do this right?" When I jump in the car, I grab my cross that's hanging from my mirror and I'm like, "Please bless this trip." It's him above everything. I have to make sure that when I get in the car and go somewhere, even in between stores, I'm praising, whether it's on the radio or jumping in and just grabbing a hold of my cross before I take off. I keep him in front of everything. My husband, who never saw those sides of me, knows what I endured. And even he says I'm a totally different person from even when he and I first met, because I don't get mad. I mean, I get upset. I still get upset. I'm not going to say I don't get mad, but his his hold on me has allowed me to not allow that build up to take place anymore. He's given me ways, not just in reading or in singing, but even in text, to handle situations in a way that I don't have to get upset and blow up anymore. I took a course in Stephen's ministry so that I can stop and listen more instead of just talking or trying to fix things. It allowed me to, through a lot of biblical references and going back in with groups, to realize that some things just aren't meant to be fixed. I can't take that myself, and I believe that that if it wasn't for the fact that he just came and just held me and said, "Stop, it's okay," that I'd probably still be trying to fix everything and do everything to make my spiritual ticket into heaven, I guess.
You know, and what's so fun with doing these stories, I don't know if you've connected the dots. I enjoy this more than anyone's going to know, being able to hear the story and just talk through it. Because as you talk, I take some notes, and to me,
Hmm.
it's almost like these dots start to connect. And so I'm going, whether you've connected this or not, I'm going to connect it for you. You
Please do.
started with trying to do this all on your own. It was all about doing things. I'm going to go about my Father's business. How can I earn his love? How can I do this? How can I do
Hmm.
that? And now that you're talking who you are today, you have moved away from what I can do to just saying, God, I can't do this, and surrendering to him and saying, God, this is yours.
Hmm. Absolutely.
That's the difference.
Absolutely.
I have to jump to one last question here.
Okay.
Again, in your past, and I appreciate you being willing to talk about your past, but I want to make it very clear it's past. It's gone.
Hmm.
It's way
Yes.
behind. But you had relationships that were short-term relationships. Yet you have a flourishing relationship of 15 years with your current husband.
Hmm.
What's the difference?
Honestly, I believe that God blessed me with, you know, the phrase for men for the Bible studies, like iron sharpens iron. I believe God kind of gave me the opposite of that. It wasn't the fire in me that needed to continually burn, but in a different form or what have you. It was more so he saw my coarseness and every divot and facet in me and of me, and gave me a cotton ball to fall on, so to speak. If I had to say with fire, it's water. My husband is number nine of 10 kids, and he grew up in a very abusive home. His father was very abusive. So he is completely opposite of me. I have purposefully tried to make this man mad, and he will not get mad.
Interesting.
He is just that type of guy where he said that he's never gotten mad, not since he was a kid fighting with his siblings. He has never been mad, and I believe that that's a true gift, and I believe that God saw that that's exactly what I needed in my life. I think that's why he made him pester me so much at work, because I didn't need something else to to take. I didn't need something to reinforce me, but give it a new direction. I needed something completely opposite of me,
Right. Now I'm gonna.
and he is.
It sounds like in many ways he's a physical version of Jesus for you. In the way that you needed to be loved, he's loving you. In the way that you needed to be cared for, he's cared for you. And the way you needed to be cherished, he's cherished you. And not saying, I don't want anyone to misconstrue what I just said. I'm not saying he
Understood.
is Jesus. I'm saying
Right,
that he
right.
has shown the love of Jesus to you in the way that you needed in a physical format.
It is. And I would not tell anyone that I found this guy or he found me. I would truly believe that Jesus placed him in my path because that's what I needed. The type of love that is within him, that he created, that God gave him, going opposite of his violent past, because his path is totally different from mine. I believe Jesus said, "This is the person I want in your life, and you're fighting it. Stop."
The moment we
This is
stop
the
trying to
person.
do things ourselves and allow God to
Hmm.
have control is the moment the good things can really happen.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to use your story about Scott's persistence because, as you know, this podcast and the whole platform of what we're doing is called Selling Jesus, and the idea reality comes to persuasion and how we relate to people. And I'll be getting more and more into what selling Jesus really means.
Hmm.
At the same time, though, persistence is a major quality within the world of sales. Professionally persistent is what I like to call it. And
Yeah.
Scott's persistence lines up with a text in the Bible where Jesus talks about the lady who would basically pester the judge until
Mhm.
finally he said, all right, I give and I'll answer your request." And so persistence is a great thing, and I'm going to be using this story in a future video. I hope that's okay.
Oh, that is wonderful. Thank you.
For now, Alyssa, we do need to call this episode a close. I thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey. Our whole life is nothing but a journey. I am thankful that I actually know you as a human being. This is not just a virtual connection that we have, and I get to be
Mhm.
a part of your life and watch your family grow. And I look forward for the many years of continually seeing that.
Thank you so much. And I hope that even the smallest bit of my journey is able to help someone and reach someone out there.
I believe it's going to. And let me go ahead and ask this. You gave your website at the very beginning.
Mhm.
Is there a connect place on that if someone wanted to reach out to you to ask more questions?
Yes, there is. On the very first page, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a section that says, I believe it's phrased, would you like to ask me something, or would you like to make contact, or something like that? And it just asks your name and your email address and a message box there. Please do. There's everybody's got a piece that branches off in some way, shape, or form. And if I've got a little piece of it to share, or they have questions for me, that's the place to do it.
So if I'm a lady and I have some relationship baggage similar to yours, and this story has related to me, you're
Hmm.
okay with me reaching out to you?
Absolutely. I ask all the time to send out to me. It doesn't even have to be about books or what have you. If there's any way that someone wants to reach out to me, and they have before, that's the place. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being willing to help others grow in their faith as well. Again, appreciate you sharing your story today. For now, we're going to call this episode a close. And
Thank
again,
you so much, Scott.
thank you so much.
Hmm.